August 29th, 1944. Northern France. Midnight. A warm wind carries the dust of 1,000 wheels. On a narrow French road, an endless convoy of US Army trucks grinds forward in low gear. Their only lights are faint blackout markers up front and cat's-eye tail lamps behind thin slits of white and red. The rumble of engines and crunch of tires on gravel drown out distant thunder from artillery at the front. Drivers with bloodshot eyes hunch over steering wheels, fighting exhaustion. As one young lieutenant's jeep crests a hill, he looks back. Specks of light stretch to the horizon in both directions. Hundreds of trucks snake along the moonlit road. Each is laden with gasoline, ammunition, and rations. They are racing to supply Allied spearheads, especially General George S. Patton's Third Army thrusting deep into France. On either side of the convoy, the silhouettes of burned-out German tanks and horse-drawn wagons lie abandoned. The German army is in retreat, but they expect the American advance to stall at any moment, starved of fuel and ammunition. Tonight, however, the Red Ball Express is on the move, and it will not be stopped. The men grip the wheels, foot heavy on the gas. Black and white soldiers alike, they share one mission. Keep 'em rolling. Part 1. Breakout and the Logistics Crisis. Dawn of August 1944 found the Allies at a tipping point. After 2 months bogged down in the Normandy hedgerows, Allied forces finally broke through German lines in late July. Patton's tanks and infantry burst out of Normandy, advancing dozens of miles per day across open French countryside. German formations fell back in disarray after the disaster at the Falaise Pocket, where roughly 50,000 of their troops were captured. By late August, Allied forces had liberated Paris and were pressing toward the German border. The sudden dash across France was beyond anything Allied planners anticipated. Yet with triumph came a looming logistical nightmare. Every mile Patton's Third Army pushed east was another mile farther from its supply base on the Normandy coast. The Allies had deliberately bombed French railroads to hinder German movements before D-Day. Now those wrecked rails hamstrung the Allied advance as well. The great ports of France, Cherbourg, Le Havre, Antwerp were either damaged, in German hands, or not yet usable. In late August 1944, nearly all Allied supplies still came in over the open Normandy beaches and through the modest port of Cherbourg. From there, everything had to be hauled by road, and the army's appetite was enormous. Some 28 divisions were advancing, each consuming 700 to 750 tons of supplies per day, roughly 20,000 tons daily in total. Patton's Third Army and Courtney Hodges's First Army alone burned through on the order of 800,000 gallons of fuel each day to keep their Shermans, half-tracks, and trucks moving. Without a near-continuous flow of gasoline, ammunition, food, and spare parts, the offensive would grind to a halt. By late August, that grim prospect was becoming reality. Allied spearheads were outpacing their supply lines. Allied commanders, including General Omar Bradley, later acknowledged that acute supply shortages on both fronts governed operations. Something had to be done immediately. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower convened his logistics officers to improvise a solution. Over the course of an intense 36-hour planning session in late August, an idea took shape. They would create a dedicated highway supply line and non-stop truck convoy system to bridge the gap between the Normandy beaches and the forward depots near the front. The Advanced Section Communication Zone ADSEC of COMZ would stand it up and manage it. Lieutenant Colonel Lauren Albert Ayers and Major Gordon Gravel sketched out the details. The ambitious goal: move roughly 82,000 tons of supplies in the first week, enough to keep the offensive rolling. Borrowing a term from American railroad slang for express freight, they named the plan the Red Ball Express. As Brigadier General Ewart G. Plank was often quoted as saying when the plan was set in motion, "Let it never be said that a lack of supplies stopped Patton when the Germans couldn't." Part 2. Launching the Red Ball Express. 25th August, 1944. Dawn. The Red Ball Express rolled into action approximately 3,358 trucks, from 67 truck companies assembled near Saint-Lô on an initial run of roughly 125 miles toward Chartres and Dreux, south of Paris. Loading from the Normandy beaches and Cherbourg, the convoys delivered to forward depots around Chartres-Dreux-la-Loupe. Trial runs had begun in the days before the formal launch, but this was the moment the Lifeline truly snapped taut. As the front surged east, one-way hauls later stretched roughly 280 to 375 miles, with some round-trip runs reaching about 600 to 750 miles on certain routes. Within 4 days, the operation hit its stride. By August 29th, 5,958 vehicles were hauling 12,342 tons of supplies in 24 hours. American logisticians had essentially created a rolling pipeline on French roads, one that operated around the clock. Trucks followed routes marked by signs with a bright red disc, the red ball, signaling all others to yield. These roads were closed to civilian traffic and reserved for the exclusive use of the supply convoys. Military police stood guard at intersections, waving the trucks through without a pause. As one period notice instructed French civilians, "Route interdite, n'entravez pas l'effort de guerre." Road closed, do not hinder the war effort. Such an immense transport undertaking needed manpower, and lots of it. The U.S. Army scoured its ranks for drivers and vehicles. About 132 truck companies at peak by August 29th were rapidly combined into this single mission. Every spare vehicle that could be found was pressed into service, from the standard 2.5-ton GMC Jimmy cargo trucks to sturdy 1.5-ton Dodge trucks and tankers. Ordnance depots worked feverishly to tune engines and, where regulations allowed, adjust governors for the grueling duty ahead. Lieutenant Colonel Lauren Little Patton Ayres organised resources, training Port Battalion troops as long-haul drivers and issuing convoy regulations. Able-bodied soldiers whose regular duties were not urgent were reassigned to drive. Mechanics, clerks, even infantrymen awaiting reassignment learned on the fly and were sent down the Red Ball route. Perhaps most remarkable was who kept this lifeline running. The Red Ball Express was staffed primarily by African-American soldiers, approximately 3/4 of the drivers and crews. Across the European theatre's motor transport service overall, about 73% of troops were African-American. On the Red Ball itself, roughly 75% were black, about 17,000 of some 23,000 drivers and mechanics. In 1944, the U.S. Army was still segregated. Black troops were largely relegated to support roles due to the racist belief among Army leaders that they would not perform well in combat. Thus, many black Americans served in quartermaster and transportation units, driving trucks, loading cargo, and performing the unglamorous work that keeps an army moving. On the Red Ball Express, these men, denied frontline glory, became indispensable warriors of the supply line. They toiled day and night on French highways, proving their skill and courage under exhausting and sometimes dangerous conditions. Contemporary reports marveled that fuel was delivered even under enemy firework few would envy. Even Patton, never shy with opinions, praised their contribution. And Eisenhower later wrote that 4 pieces of equipment, the bulldozer, the Jeep, the 2.5-ton truck, and the C-47, were regarded by senior officers as among the most vital to success. He also singled out the DUKW as one of the most valuable pieces of equipment in the European campaigns. 2 parallel highways were designated to streamline the operation. The northern route carried fully loaded trucks forward toward the front. A southern route returned empties to Normandy for the next load. This one-way loop kept traffic flowing and prevented the convoys from snarling themselves in their own congestion. Red Ball trucks travelled in convoys of 5 or more, each led by a jeep with a blue flag and trailed by a rear guard jeep with a green flag. Regulations set the speed at 25 miles per hour, distance between trucks at 60 yards and no passing. On paper, it was a marvel of military organization. In practice, the Red Ball Express quickly took on a life of its own, part miracle, part madness, and wholly unforgettable to those who rode it. Part 3. life on the Red Ball, danger and determination. And day and night, the convoys roared over backcountry roads and through ruined villages. Drivers often drove at night in blackout conditions, using only the faint glow of the truck ahead's tiny tail lamp to guide them. You'd be watching those damn little blackout lights. It drove you blind. It was like hypnosis, remembered one driver. 2-man teams drove in shifts. While one man took the wheel, his partner might snatch a few minutes of fitful sleep bouncing in the passenger seat. If a convoy halted even briefly, drivers would slump over the wheel in exhaustion. A gentle tap on the rear bumper from the truck behind meant it was time to wake and move again. Some were so fatigued that they fell asleep while driving. More than one driver jolted awake as his truck drifted toward a ditch or a pole, recovering control just in time. The danger did not come only from within. By late summer and autumn 1944, the Luftwaffe's ability to strike was greatly diminished. Air attacks on convoys were uncommon, though not unheard of. In one account, a convoy came under sudden strafing fire, bullets clattering on truck bodies like stones on a tin roof as drivers bailed into roadside ditches for cover. More often, the threats were grounded. Mines were a constant worry. Trucks tended to drive down the middle of the road, figuring any mines would be at the soft shoulders. Snipers or scattered German units sometimes harassed convoys at the fringes of the front, and always there was the basic peril of motor transport high speeds, heavy loads, and worn-out machinery on narrow, bomb-damaged roads. Accidents were common. A blown tire or a moment's inattention could send a truck tumbling into a ditch or shattering into a French stone wall. Breakdowns were a daily reality. The strain on vehicles was immense. Trucks groaned under stacked ammunition crates and jerry cans of fuel, often exceeding their rated capacity. Tires blew with alarming frequency under the weight and constant running. In the first month alone, roughly 40,000 truck tires were worn out or destroyed on Red Ball routes. Maintenance crews at depots laboured to patch, retread, and even tape together damaged tires to keep the fleet rolling. Engines overheated, oil ran low, bolts rattled loose on the washboard roads. Convoy mechanics became adept at field fixes, replacing a fan belt or fuel pump by the roadside, often in darkness and under pressure. Many drivers, needing momentum for hills, disabled the speed governors on their trucks. The result, convoys sometimes hurtled well above the official speed limit. "Oh boy, do I remember that Red Ball gang," laughed one US Army mechanic later. "They were a hell of a crew. They had no fear. Those guys were crazy, like they were getting paid for every run." The Army set up rest stops at intervals where drivers could get a hot cup of coffee and a donut from Red Cross volunteers. Sometimes cots were available for a brief nap while a second crew took over the truck. Mostly, though, men ate on the move cold, sea-ration tins of hash or beans, consumed while bouncing along in the cab. A few enterprising souls wired a food tin to the engine manifold to warm it up. That worked until someone forgot a can, which then exploded under the hood and earned a roaring reprimand from the motor pool sergeant. Trucks travelled in pairs or small convoys for security and mutual support. Military police battalions, including the 793rd, patrolled the Red Ball highways, directing traffic at critical junctions and guarding against theft. Black marketeers lurked, ready to buy fuel or rations from unscrupulous drivers. The going rate was said to be a small fortune for a 5-gallon fuel can. Armed guards rode with many convoys to prevent looting, whether by desperate civilians or even Allied troops looking to requisition an extra load. In one incident, an American colonel at the front stopped a fuel convoy and demanded they hand over their gasoline on the spot. His unit was dry, and he wouldn't wait for the official distribution. Despite the truckers' protests, he got his gas. The convoy was left only with enough fuel to limp back to base. On some days, the front moved so fast that drivers arrived at a designated depot only to find no one there. The unit had leapfrogged ahead. In those cases, they improvised, distributing their cargo to any Allied unit that needed it. One Red Ball veteran remembered driving up directly to a stranded Sherman tank that was out of gas and personally passing jerry cans to the tank crew while German soldiers were only a few hundred yards away, within shouting distance, across a hedgerow. By early September 1944, the Red Ball Express had become legendary among the troops, and even the enemy was taking notice. Observers behind German lines could see the ceaseless columns of trucks and the dust clouds they kicked up by day. The Germans had never witnessed an army supplied on the move at such staggering scale. The US Army was the most mechanized in the world in 1944. By contrast, a typical German division still relied on thousands of horses and wagons. Their supply lines literally moved at a horse's pace. As German commanders watched the Red Ball convoys pour eastward, they faced a reality their logistics struggled to match. A contemporary Time magazine editorial observed that this American supply miracle reflected a national tradition accustomed to great spaces, transcontinental railways, nationwide trucking chains, endless roads, and millions of automobiles. American logistics powered by industry, improvisation, and determination had become a decisive weapon on the Western Front. Part 4. Turning the Tide and Patton's Lifeline. For Patton's Third Army, the Red Ball Express truly won the race across France. By mid-September 1944, US forces had reached the Moselle River and the approaches to Germany's Siegfried Line. They had come hundreds of miles since breaking out of Normandy, conquering in weeks terrain that planners thought might take months. This whirlwind pursuit was possible only because the logistics lifeline managed to keep up. Eisenhower noted that the advance had been so rapid that further movement was becoming nearly impossible, not because of German strength, but because of the sheer length of Allied supply lines. Indeed, by late September, the front did bog down. As distance stretched the Red Ball to its limits, critical shortages re-emerged. Fuel had to be rationed and diverted famously. Some of Patton's tanks paused because gasoline was allocated to Field Marshal Montgomery's operation in the Netherlands. The Allied command had to face that even the heroic trucking operation was not enough by itself to sustain all offensives simultaneously. German resistance stiffened as well, especially around strongholds like Metz and Aachen. New supply lines were coming online. The port of Antwerp was captured in early September, but it was not usable until the Scheldt approaches were cleared and mines swept. By late November, ships could unload vast quantities much closer to the front. Railroads were gradually restored, allowing heavy supplies to move by train part of the way. And US Army pipeline units had been hard at work, laying miles of pipe to pump fuel overland from the beaches to forward depots. These improvements meant the unique Red Ball truck lanes were less critical by mid-November. On November 16, 1944, after roughly 83 days of continuous operations, the Red Ball Express was officially shut down. It had more than done its job. In total, Red Ball convoys delivered about 412,000 tons, 412,193. By official count of supplies across France, Eisenhower issued a message of commendation in October 44, praising the Red Ball drivers. The line was the lifeline between combat and supply. His appreciation for the drivers and mechanics was unequivocal. Many years later, his son John S.D. Eisenhower, who served in Europe as a junior officer, wrote that without the Red Ball Express, the advance across France could not have been made. The story did not end in November. Red Ball units, though officially stood down, remained in action under other names. Many truck companies were shifted to newer supply routes, with names like White Ball, Green Diamond, and the ABC Express, as the front moved farther east through the autumn and winter of 1944 to 45. When the Germans launched their last-ditch offensive in the Ardennes in December, the Allied response leaned heavily on motor transport. Though the Red Ball lanes had closed, its companies and habits endured. Veterans of the route rushed fuel and ammunition out of threatened depots to keep it from falling into enemy hands. Hundreds of trucks were marshaled to evacuate fuel dumps ahead of the German advance, denying the panzers the gasoline they desperately needed. Truck convoys also carried entire units shuttling the 82nd Airborne to the northern shoulder around Werbermont and the 101st Airborne to Bastogne. This rapid reaction by truck helped save the Allied position during the Bulge, allowing US forces to regroup and hold the line until Patton's army counterattacked. When Germany was finally defeated in May 1945, it was not just superior strategy or bravery that achieved victory. It was also the relentless supply chain that fed the fight from D-Day to VE Day. Part 5. Aftermath and Legacy of the Red Ball Express. When the guns finally fell silent in Europe, the unsung heroes of the Red Ball Express quietly faded back into the ranks. There was no individual glory in hauling beans and bullets, no medals for making deliveries. But within the US Army, their achievement was not forgotten. The Red Ball Express entered the annals of military logistics as a shining example of innovation under pressure. The Army publicized the operation's success in wartime newsreels and articles, and in 1952, Hollywood released Red Ball Express, dramatizing the exploits of a mixed-race trucking unit racing to supply the front, though it inaccurately depicted integrated platoons for 1944's segregated army. Though a B-movie, it nodded to the real history and the vital contribution of African American soldiers. For many of those black veterans, their Red Ball service was a point of pride long after the war, a rebuttal to the prejudiced doubters in the army hierarchy. They had answered the call, kept the trucks rolling, and helped defeat Nazi Germany. As one historian observed, these men had been denied the full benefits of American citizenship, yet were committed to doing their part to win the war. In the words of one driver, "We did our job, hoping for the best." Being young and about 4,000 miles from home, anybody would be scared. But we did our job. The Red Ball Express's legacy also lives on in how the Army thinks about logistics and mobility. Eisenhower carried hard-won lessons from wartime logistics into peacetime, drawing on his 1919 transcontinental convoy experience, his observations of Germany's autobahns during World War II, and Cold War civil defense concerns as he later championed what became the US interstate highway system. In more immediate terms, the Red Ball name was revived in December 1965 for high-priority aviation logistics in Vietnam, focused on aircraft parts and expedited air cargo, not general truck convoys on the scale of World War II. The name has become shorthand for any high-priority military convoy or distribution system, a tribute to the original. Standing on a quiet French backroad today, one might never guess that it once throbbed with the traffic of war trucks laden with fuel, bullets, and hope rushing east. The Red Ball Express does not have the fame of D-Day or the drama of a battlefield charge. Its soldiers fought not human enemies but time, distance, and fatigue. Yet their contribution was every bit as decisive. In the words of a proud veteran, "When General Patton said for you to be there, you were there if you had to drive all day and all night." And so they drove, day and night, until the job was done. The Red Ball Express's engines are silent now, its roads returned to peace. But the memory of that great convoy rolls on through history. This documentary script is based on verified historical data, first-hand accounts, and primary sources. Every effort has been made to ensure accuracy through official wartime records, combat reports, and scholarly research. Technical details, quotations, and descriptions are drawn from archival materials, including logistics records, military correspondence, and veteran memoirs. Some scenes are dramatized to convey typical experiences of Red Ball Express convoys and drivers, while remaining faithful to documented facts. Where sources vary, approximations are noted. This production is created with respect for the people, events, and legacies it depicts, aiming to preserve history with authenticity and integrity.